The email arrived at 9:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. Subject line: Board presentation, final version. I opened the attachment. It was the quarterly risk assessment, the one I'd submitted to my boss 3 weeks ago, the one that would be presented to the board that afternoon. Except it wasn't my report anymore. Page 7 was missing. The entire section on regulatory exposure. The part where I'd outlined a $47 million potential liability if we didn't adjust our compliance framework before the new federal regulations took effect in 60 days. Page 12 was rewritten. My recommendation to halt expansion in 3 states until we achieved regulatory compliance had been changed to proceed with caution while monitoring developments. Page 18 showed different numbers. My risk probability assessment of 73% had been reduced to 31%. My impact rating of critical had been downgraded to moderate. Every substantive warning I documented had been softened, removed, or contradicted. My name was still on the cover page as primary author. My name is Rachel, and I was a senior risk analyst at a regional insurance company in Charlotte. I'd been there 6 years. I'd never had a report altered before submission to the board. I scrolled to the document properties. Last modified, yesterday, 4:47 p.m. Modified by CFO. My boss. The person who'd asked me to assess our regulatory exposure. The person who'd told me to be thorough and direct. The person who'd just buried every critical finding and left my name attached to the sanitized version. I opened my email and found my original submission, sent to the CFO on October 23rd. Subject line: Q4 Risk Assessment, Regulatory Compliance Analysis. I compared the 2 documents side by side. 18 substantive changes. Every single one reduced the severity of the risk or removed the recommendation to act. I took screenshots of both versions. Then I saved my original report to my personal drive. And I waited. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't call the CFO. I didn't ask why the report had been changed. I just opened a new folder on my personal drive and labeled it Q4 Risk Assessment, Documentation. I saved both versions. Then I created a comparison document, a simple table, 3 columns. Column 1, Original Finding. Column 2, Modified Version. Column 3, Page Reference. 18 rows, 1 for each substantive change. I worked on it for 40 minutes. Precise, factual, no commentary. When I finished, I saved it and closed my laptop. At 10:23 a.m., I received a calendar invitation. Board presentation, risk assessment. Scheduled for 2 p.m. Attendees, board members, CEO, CFO, General Counsel, Head of Compliance. I was not invited. I accepted the invitation anyway, then immediately declined it with a note. Apologies, I was added in error. The CFO's assistant replied, "Correct, you're not needed for this session." I saved that exchange. At 11:15 a.m., the CFO stopped by my desk. "Rachel, just wanted to thank you for the thorough work on the risk assessment. The board will appreciate the analysis." I looked up. "I saw the final version this morning." "Good. Any questions before the presentation?" The regulatory compliance section was significantly revised. Yes, I made some adjustments for clarity. The board doesn't need all the technical detail. The liability estimate was also changed. I updated it based on additional information from legal. They believe the risk is lower than your initial assessment suggested. Did legal provide that in writing? He paused. It was a verbal consultation. I see. Is there a problem? No, I just want to make sure the board has accurate information. They will. Thanks again for your work. He walked away. I opened my documentation folder and added a new entry. Date, time, conversation summary. His statement that legal had provided verbal input, contradicting my analysis. Then I sent an email to the general counsel. Hi, Patricia. Quick question about the Q4 risk assessment. The CFO mentioned you provided updated guidance on the regulatory liability estimate. Do you have documentation I can reference for my records? She replied within 20 minutes. I haven't reviewed the Q4 assessment yet. I'll see it for the first time at the board meeting this afternoon. What specifically are you asking about? I read her response twice. Then I replied, No worries, just checking on something. I'll follow up after the board meeting if needed. I saved that exchange too. At 1:47 p.m., I left my desk and walked to the break room on the 3rd floor, the one with windows overlooking the main conference room where board meetings were held. I got coffee, sat at a table, opened my laptop, and worked on a different project. At 2:03 p.m., I saw the board members arriving. They filed into the conference room and sat around the table. The CFO was presenting. I could see him standing at the front of the room with slides on the screen behind him. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see him gesturing to the slides, pointing at charts, speaking with confidence. The presentation lasted 34 minutes. At 2:37 p.m., the meeting ended. The board members filed out. The CEO shook hands with a few of them. Then they left. I finished my coffee and went back to my desk. At 3:42 p.m., I received an email from the head of compliance. Rachel, can you join me for a brief conversation tomorrow at 10 a.m., conference room B? I replied, I'll be there. That evening, I reviewed my documentation one more time. Then I went home. The next morning, I arrived at 9:45 a.m. At 10 a.m., I walked to conference room B. The head of compliance was there. Her name was Karen. Rachel, thanks for coming. Close the door. I sat down. I wanted to ask you about the risk assessment you prepared for the board. I waited. I was surprised by some of the findings. Specifically, the regulatory compliance section seemed less detailed than I expected from you. What surprised you? The liability estimate. 31% probability, moderate impact. That seemed optimistic given the new regulations coming into effect. That wasn't my assessment. She looked at me carefully. What do you mean? My original assessment showed 73% probability, critical impact, estimated liability of $47 million if we don't achieve compliance before the regulations take effect in 60 days. That's very different from what the board saw. Yes. Do you have your original assessment? Yes. Can I see it? I pulled it up on my laptop, turned the screen toward her. She read in silence for several minutes. Then she said, This is significantly more concerning than what was presented yesterday. I know. Who modified it? The CFO. He made 18 substantive changes between my submission and the board presentation. Did he discuss these changes with you? No. I saw the final version for the first time yesterday morning. And your name is still listed as primary author? Yes. She leaned back. That's a problem. I agree. Did you discuss this with the CFO? Briefly. He said he updated the liability estimate based on verbal input from legal, but legal told me they hadn't reviewed the assessment before the board meeting. Karen was quiet for a moment. Rachel, I need you to send me both versions, your original and the version that went to the board. Can you do that? Yes. And any communications related to the changes. I have everything documented. Send it to me by end of day. Mark it confidential. I will. One more thing. Don't discuss this with anyone else, including the CFO. Understood. The meeting ended at 10:23 a.m. I went back to my desk and compiled everything. Both reports, the comparison table, the email exchange with the CFO, the email exchange with legal, the timeline of events. I sent it all to Karen at 2:17 p.m. She replied at 3:04 p.m. Received. Thank you. 3 days passed. I continued my normal work. I didn't hear anything from Karen. I didn't hear anything from the CFO. On the 4th day, I received an email from the CEO's assistant. Rachel, the CEO would like to meet with you tomorrow at 11 a.m. Please confirm your availability. I replied, I'm available. The next morning, I arrived at the executive floor at 10:55 a.m. The CEO's assistant showed me into his office. The CEO was at his desk. Karen was there too. So was Patricia from legal. Rachel, come in. Have a seat. I sat down. The CEO pulled up a document on his screen. I've been reviewing your Q4 risk assessment, both versions. I waited. Karen brought this to my attention 3 days ago. She expressed concern about the differences between what you submitted and what I saw at the board meeting. He turned his screen toward me. Your original assessment identifies a $47 million regulatory liability, 73% probability, critical impact. You recommend halting expansion in 3 states until we achieve compliance. That's correct. The version I saw at the board meeting showed $14 million liability, 31% probability, moderate impact. It recommended proceeding with caution. Yes. Those are dramatically different assessments. They are. Did you revise your analysis between submission and the board presentation? No, I submitted one version. The CFO modified it before presenting to the board. Did he discuss these modifications with you? No. I saw the changes for the first time the morning of the board meeting. Patricia spoke up. The CFO also told Rachel that I had provided input supporting the lower liability estimate. I had not reviewed the assessment at that time. The CEO looked at her. You're certain? Yes, I saw the assessment for the first time at the board meeting. The CEO was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked me, walk me through your methodology for the $47 million estimate. I pulled up my original analysis on my laptop. The new federal regulations require updated compliance frameworks for multi-state insurance operations. We currently operate in 11 states. 3 of those states have additional requirements beyond the federal baseline. We have 60 days to implement the new framework. Based on our current compliance infrastructure, I estimate we need 4 months to fully implement. That puts us 2 months past the deadline. What's the penalty for noncompliance? Fines of $50,000 per day per state for operating without proper compliance certification. If regulators determine willful noncompliance, they can suspend our license to operate in that state. And the $47 million estimate? Conservative calculation. 3 states, 60 days past deadline, $50,000 per day per state. That's $9 million in fines. Add the cost of emergency compliance implementation, legal fees, and potential license suspension, and we're looking at $35 to $50 million total exposure. And you assessed this as 73% probability? Yes. Based on our current timeline and resource allocation, I don't see how we achieve compliance in 60 days without significant changes. Patricia added, I've now reviewed Rachel's analysis in detail. Her methodology is sound. The regulatory interpretation is accurate. The timeline is realistic. The CEO looked at Karen. Your assessment? I agree with Rachel's analysis. The risk is critical. We should halt expansion and redirect resources to compliance implementation immediately. The CEO leaned back in his chair. Why would the CFO modify a critical risk assessment before presenting it to the board? No one answered. He continued. I'm going to ask a direct question. Do you believe the CFO intentionally downplayed this risk? I chose my words carefully. I believe he made substantive changes to my analysis that reduced the perceived severity of the risk. Whether that was intentional or based on different information, I can't say. But he told you legal had provided input supporting the lower estimate, and legal says they provided no such input. That's correct. The CEO was quiet again. Then he said, I need to understand his reasoning. Rachel, I'm going to ask you to present your original analysis to the full board next week. They need to see what I should have seen the first time. I can do that. Karen, work with Patricia to develop an emergency compliance plan. I want options on my desk by Friday. Understood. And no one discusses this conversation outside this room. Clear? We all nodded. The meeting ended at 11:47 a.m. I went back to my desk and waited. 2 hours later, the CFO stopped by. Rachel, I just got a strange request from the CEO's office. He wants you to present the risk assessment to the board again next week. Do you know what that's about? He asked me to walk through my analysis. Your analysis? I presented the assessment. He wants to hear my methodology directly. His expression tightened. Did you say something to him about the report? He asked to see my work. I showed him. What exactly did you show him? My analysis, the one I submitted to you on October 23rd. He stared at me. That version wasn't ready for the board. That's why I made revisions. The CEO asked for my original work. I provided it. You should have come to me first. The CEO made a direct request. I complied. His face went red. This is a serious breach of protocol, Rachel. You don't go around your manager to the CEO. I didn't go around anyone. The CEO asked a question. I answered it. We're going to discuss this further. My office, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I'll be there. He walked away. I added the conversation to my documentation. That evening, I received an email from the CEO. Rachel, the board meeting is scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m. Please prepare a 30-minute presentation covering your full risk analysis, methodology, and recommendations. Include the original assessment you submitted to the CFO, and note any differences from the version presented last month. I replied, I'll be ready. The next morning, I arrived at the CFO's office at 9 a.m. He was on the phone. He gestured for me to wait outside. I stood in the hallway for 11 minutes. Then his assistant said, He's had to step into an urgent meeting. He'll reschedule with you. I went back to my desk. He never rescheduled. Tuesday arrived. At 1:55 p.m., I walked to the main conference room. The full board was there. 7 members, the CEO, the CFO, Patricia from legal, Karen from compliance. The CEO opened the meeting. Thank you all for making time. We're revisiting the Q4 risk assessment. Rachel, you're up. I connected my laptop to the screen. I presented for 32 minutes. I walked through the regulatory requirements, the timeline, the compliance gaps, the financial exposure, the probability assessment. I showed my original recommendations: halt expansion, redirect resources, implement emergency compliance plan. Then I pulled up the side-by-side comparison. This was my submitted analysis. This was the version presented to the board last month. Here are the 18 substantive differences. I went through each one. Factual, no emotion, just data. When I finished, one of the board members asked, "Who made these changes?" The CEO answered. The CFO modified the report between Rachel's submission and the board presentation. Another board member looked at the CFO. Why? The CFO shifted in his seat. I made adjustments based on additional information and judgment calls about probability. What additional information? Consultations with legal and other stakeholders. Patricia spoke up. I did not provide any input on this assessment before the original board presentation. Then what information supported reducing the liability estimate from $47 million to $14 million? The CFO didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "I used my judgment based on 15 years of experience in financial risk management." One of the board members leaned forward. Your judgment contradicted a detailed analysis from your senior risk analyst, an analysis that appears to be methodologically sound and supported by compliance and legal review. Risk assessment involves interpretation, the CEO interrupted. It also involves honesty. You told Rachel that legal had provided input supporting your revisions. That was false. The CFO's face tightened. I may have misspoken. You also left Rachel's name on a report that no longer reflected her analysis. The board made decisions based on information they believed came from her, when in fact it had been substantially altered. The room was silent. Another board member asked, "Rachel, if we had implemented your recommendations in October, where would we be now?" We'd be 3 weeks into an emergency compliance implementation. We'd likely achieve certification before the deadline. Total cost would be approximately $8 million. And if we continue on our current path, we'll miss the deadline by approximately 8 weeks. We'll face daily fines starting in 41 days. Estimated total exposure is $35 to $50 million. The board member looked at the CEO. We need to implement her recommendations immediately. The CEO nodded. Agreed. Karen, you and Patricia have an emergency plan ready? Yes. We can brief the board in 30 minutes. Do it. He turned to the CFO. You and I need to have a private conversation. Now. The CFO stood, followed the CEO out of the room. They didn't come back. Karen and Patricia presented the compliance plan. The board approved it unanimously. They allocated $12 million for emergency implementation. The meeting ended at 4:18 p.m. I packed up my laptop and went back to my desk. At 5:47 p.m., I received an email from the CEO. Rachel, effective immediately, you'll report directly to me until we restructure the risk management function. The CFO is no longer with the company. Thank you for your integrity and professionalism. I read it twice. Then I replied, Understood. Thank you. The next morning, a company-wide email went out. The CFO has left the company to pursue other opportunities. We're conducting a search for his replacement. In the interim, risk management will report directly to the CEO. No details, no explanation, just the announcement. The compliance implementation moved forward. Fast. Aggressive timeline. Full resource allocation. I worked with Karen and Patricia for 6 weeks straight. Weekends, late nights, building frameworks, training teams, coordinating with regulators. We achieved certification 3 days before the deadline. Total cost? $11.2 million. Under budget. Avoided liability, $47 million. 2 months later, the board appointed a new CFO. External hire. Experienced. Professional. Her first week, she scheduled a meeting with me. Rachel, I've reviewed the risk assessment situation. I want you to know that will never happen again under my leadership. I appreciate that. I'm also restructuring the risk function. I want you to lead it. VP of Risk Management. Full authority. Direct board reporting. Are you interested? I thought about it. Yes. Good. HR will send you the details. 6 months after that, I was presenting quarterly risk assessments directly to the board. My name on the reports. My analysis unchanged. My recommendations unfiltered. One of the board members pulled me aside after a presentation. Rachel, I wanted to ask you something. When you discovered your report had been altered, why didn't you come to the board immediately? I followed the chain of command. I documented everything and waited for the right moment. What if that moment hadn't come? Then I would have escalated, but I wanted to give the system a chance to work properly first. And if it hadn't worked? I had documentation. The truth would have come out eventually. The board member nodded. That's the right approach. Patient, professional, strategic. The conversation ended. I walked back to my office and opened my documentation folder, the one I'd created a year ago. It was still there, both versions of the report, the comparison table, the emails, the timeline. I reviewed it once. Then I moved it to an archive. I didn't delete it, just filed it away. Not as a trophy, not as evidence, just as a reminder that truth doesn't need to be loud to be effective. It just needs to be documented and patient. Because in the end, facts don't care about politics or hierarchy or impressive titles. They just wait to be seen by someone willing to look. And when that person is the CEO, the facts speak for themselves.